There are moments in life when the ground seems to shift beneath your feet, not because of an earthquake or a sudden disaster, but because someone you trusted took the very core of your loyalty and crushed it in their hands. They didn't flinch. They didn't apologize. They walked away with a smile as if they had just won a game you didn't even know you were playing. In that moment, your mind races. You imagine confronting them, exposing them, making them pay. Yet you stay silent, and they take that silence as proof that they have escaped, that they've beaten you. They believe the story ends here. But what they don't see is that the story has only just begun. The most powerful kind of justice is not loud, it's not public, and it doesn't come with flashing lights. It moves quietly, almost invisibly, beneath the surface of life, weaving consequences into the fabric of everyday events. To those who are blind to it, it looks like nothing is happening at all. But the Stoics understood this better than anyone. Marcus Aurelius wrote that every action is tied to a chain of events, and those events will always align with the nature of truth. You might call it divine justice, or karma, or simply cause and effect. But whatever name you give it, it never misses its mark. In our modern world, appearances can deceive. You might see the one who wronged you living in a beautiful apartment in downtown Chicago, traveling to Paris, surrounded by friends at rooftop parties. You scroll through their life online and wonder if justice even exists. But what you cannot see in those pictures is the restlessness in their heart. What you cannot hear in those videos is the sleeplessness that lingers in the quiet hours. What you cannot feel is the slow erosion of their inner peace. Because justice begins on the inside long before it shows on the outside. I once knew a man named Daniel who lived in Seattle. He betrayed his closest friend for a promotion, quietly taking credit for work that wasn't his. To everyone else, he was winning. New car, new office, expensive suits. But late at night, when the city lights reflected on the glass of his apartment, he couldn't escape the gnawing in his gut. Passing a certain coffee shop on his way to work would trigger memories of laughter he could never have again. Hearing a certain song on the radio would make him uneasy for reasons he couldn't explain to anyone. That's the hidden hand of justice at work. Rearranging the furniture of a person's soul until they can no longer sit comfortably. This is what makes the invisible hand of justice so terrifying to those who deserve it. There is no warning letter. There is no moment when they can prepare. It starts small, a strange sense of unease, a passing thought they can't shake, a smile that doesn't feel real anymore. Then the cracks widen. The mind, once skilled at avoiding self-awareness, begins to trip over its own memories. The silence they once mocked starts to echo, and piece by piece, they begin to feel the weight of what they've done. For you, this is where the power lies. You do not need to fight them. You do not need to prove them wrong. You do not even need to witness their unraveling. The beauty of this process is that it frees you from the role of executioner. You can step away, heal, and rebuild while life itself takes care of the rest. This is not wishful thinking. It is the law of cause and effect that Stoic philosophers built their lives upon. Act in harmony with truth, and truth will protect you. Act against it, and truth will undo you. So when someone wrongs you and seems to walk away untouched, don't mistake the quiet for absence of justice. The quiet is where the work begins, and by the time you hear about their downfall, it will be long after the real collapse has already happened inside them. They will look in the mirror one day and realize they are no longer the person they thought they were. That realization will not come with an audience, but it will be devastating. If you want to keep hearing stories like this, if you want to understand the hidden ways justice moves in our lives, then subscribe to this channel right now. Your support gives me the motivation to keep bringing you powerful stories and timeless wisdom that help you protect your peace and grow stronger every single day. Now, I want to hear from you. Let's make this a conversation. Here's your question. When someone wrongs you, which is more powerful, a confronting them and demanding an apology. B. Walking away in silence and letting life handle the rest. Comment your answer below with A or B and tell me why you chose it. I'll be reading your responses. Peace is a fragile thing. You can't buy it, you can't fake it, and once it's gone, no amount of distraction can truly bring it back. When someone violates the trust of a person who stood by them, they don't just lose a relationship, they lose a piece of themselves, a quiet stability that used to anchor their days. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins as the faintest shift in the background of their life, something they can't quite name. But it grows until it becomes a shadow they can no longer ignore. Daniel had always prided himself on his ability to keep moving forward. In Seattle, where the rain paints the streets in silver and the nights are long, he had built an image of success that others admired. After taking credit for work that belonged to his closest friend, he stepped into a higher position at his company. The applause felt good. The congratulations poured in. On the surface, he looked untouchable, but peace of mind has a way of slipping through the cracks when it knows it no longer belongs. It started with his sleep. At first it was just 1 or 2 restless nights, the kind anyone could dismiss as stress. But then the pattern deepened. He would wake at 2 or 3 in the morning, staring at the dark ceiling, unable to quiet his thoughts. He replayed conversations in his head, not because he wanted to, but because they forced themselves on him like unwanted guests. His body would feel heavy, yet his mind refused to settle. In those quiet hours, when the city was still and no one could see him, the part of him that had been silenced by ambition began to speak again. The mind remembers what the ego tries to bury. A specific cafe on his route to work became a trigger he couldn't understand at first. It was the place where he and his friend used to meet, sharing ideas that would later shape the project he had claimed as his own. Passing by, he would feel an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, a mixture of longing and shame. He started taking longer routes just to avoid it, telling himself it was about traffic. But it wasn't traffic. It was conscience. From the outside, people still saw the confident Daniel they thought they knew. They saw the tailored suits, the networking dinners, the curated life he shared online. But peace is not measured by appearances. It is measured by the absence of mental storms, and Daniel's storms had begun to gather. A song on the radio could send his thoughts spiraling. An unexpected pause in a conversation could remind him of silence he didn't know how to fill. Even moments of happiness felt thinner, like fabric worn too many times. Science has a way of confirming what the Stoics knew centuries ago. Neuroscience tells us that unresolved guilt keeps the brain in a mild but constant state of alert. The amygdala signals danger, cortisol floods the body, and the nervous system stays tense. This chronic state slowly erodes health, focus, and joy. Daniel didn't read studies about it. He didn't need to. He was living the proof. His shoulders ached without explanation. His patience grew shorter. The things that once brought him comfort now felt hollow. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said that no man is free who is not master of himself. Losing peace of mind is losing mastery. It is living as a captive to thoughts you cannot quiet and emotions you cannot control. For Daniel, the punishment wasn't a public scandal or financial loss. It was being left alone with the full weight of himself. And that is often the first and most profound way karma begins its work. Not with an explosion, but with a whisper that grows louder each day. What makes this kind of justice so powerful is its privacy. No one else needs to see it for it to be real. You don't have to hear their confession or witness their unraveling to know it's happening. The absence of your presence, the silence you leave behind, becomes a mirror they cannot avoid. They start to notice the difference in their own life. The laughter feels different. The air feels heavier. The certainty they once carried begins to slip through their fingers. Daniel would never admit it to his colleagues, but he felt it every time he stood by the window of his office and watched the city below. The view was everything he thought he wanted, yet it no longer looked the same. It was as if the colors had dulled. The lights shone, but they did not warm him. That is the slow crumble of peace of mind, and once it begins, it rarely stops until the lesson has been faced. This is the first sign that life has started its quiet correction. It is not something you can measure in numbers or capture in photographs. It is a shift in the soul, a pulling away of the comfort they once took for granted. And it is often more devastating than any external consequence. Because while you can rebuild a career or replace possessions, you cannot buy back the kind of peace that comes from knowing you acted with honor. Once lost, it must be earned, and earning it requires a reckoning that most are not ready to face. When the first cracks appear in someone's peace of mind, it is only a matter of time before the outside world begins to reflect the change. For Daniel, the shift was so gradual, he didn't notice it at first. Seattle was still the same city, with its cold mist and busy streets. His office still held the same corner view he once took pride in. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, doors that used to open for him began to stay shut. Invitations that once arrived without effort stopped coming. The warmth in people's voices cooled, though no one said why. Opportunities have a rhythm. They come not just because of skill or ambition, but because of trust, connection, and the invisible network of goodwill a person builds over time. Daniel had once enjoyed that rhythm effortlessly. A phone call from an industry contact might lead to a speaking opportunity. A chance meeting at a coffee shop could turn into a project offer. It all seemed natural, as if the world was conspiring to push him forward. But when someone acts without integrity, that rhythm shifts. The phone rings less. The coffee meetings feel more polite than warm. The sparkle of enthusiasm in others' eyes begins to fade. At work, the changes were subtle, but undeniable. A colleague he had mentored was given the lead on a high-profile account he had expected to handle. The explanation was framed as a strategic decision, but Daniel knew better. The same colleague had once been close to the friend he betrayed. People notice more than they admit, and over time they begin to adjust their choices accordingly. Number, confrontation, no public rejection, just a quiet distancing. Outside of work, his social life began to feel different. The group dinners he had been a regular at suddenly seemed to happen without him. When he did attend, the energy had changed. Conversations stayed on the surface. Jokes didn't land the same way. There was a carefulness in how people spoke to him, as if they were measuring their words. That kind of subtle shift can't be forced or faked. It grows from an instinct people have when they no longer feel entirely safe with someone. The Stoics believed that nature corrects itself by removing what no longer aligns with its order. In human terms, this often looks like opportunities drying up and relationships losing depth. It is not punishment in the way we usually think of it. It is more like pruning. A tree with a diseased branch must lose it, so the rest of the tree can survive. When someone chooses dishonor, the people and opportunities that thrive on trust quietly move away. For Daniel, it wasn't just the loss of new opportunities that stung. It was the absence of the old, easy flow he once took for granted. There had been a time when he could walk into a room and feel the connection spark immediately. Now, there were pauses. People checked their phones more often when he spoke. Contact was shorter. Relationships that had once felt genuine began to feel like transactions. And even those transactions became fewer. There was no single moment he could point to and say, "This is when it all changed." That's the nature of this kind of consequence. It is slow, deliberate, and almost invisible to the outside world. To him, though, it was unmistakable. He could feel the shift in how people saw him, even if they never said it outright. And the worst part was knowing he could not explain it away. The opportunities he lost didn't vanish by chance. The depth in his relationships didn't fade because of bad timing. It was the quiet echo of his own actions returning to him. This is the second and third sign of life's correction at work. The external world begins to mirror the internal decay. A person who once thrived on the trust of others starts to notice that trust slipping away, and along with it, the chances, the offers, the moments that once felt certain. It's not a collapse all at once, but a steady retreat. And because it is not dramatic, it is harder to fight. You can argue against false accusations. You can rebuild after a public failure. But you cannot force people to trust you again once they have quietly decided not to. For someone like Daniel, the most difficult part was realizing that there was no clear way back. He could try to be more likable, more generous, more engaged, but those efforts felt hollow even to him. The foundation had cracked, and the structures built on it could no longer hold the same weight. Every polite smile felt like a reminder of the gap between who he was and who he pretended to be. Every missed opportunity was a quiet confirmation that the network he had once relied on was no longer working in his favor. It is tempting to think that losing opportunities or depth in relationships is just bad luck or a temporary phase. But when it follows the loss of peace of mind, it is often a sign of something deeper. Life has a way of aligning with truth, and truth rarely supports those who build on deception. That is why these signs are so powerful. They are not accidents. They are the quiet way the universe, or God, or simply the nature of things, begins to set the balance right. And for the one experiencing it, the silence of that correction can be louder than any public judgment. There is a particular kind of justice that feels almost poetic. It does not come from you, and it does not arrive with fanfare. It comes when life quietly sends a person into the same experience they once created for someone else. This is the mirror stage, when they meet their own reflection in the form of another human being. For Daniel, that mirror came in the form of a new colleague named Victor. At first, Victor seemed like an ally, someone sharp and well-connected who could open doors. Daniel admired his confidence and his charm, and soon he found himself trusting Victor the way his former friend had once trusted him. They began collaborating on a major account, sharing ideas and building momentum. It felt almost exhilarating, as if he had found a partner who understood his drive. But as the weeks went on, subtle cracks appeared. Victor began making small decisions without consulting Daniel. At first they were minor, easy to overlook, but they carried a familiar undertone. Daniel started noticing his ideas showing up in meetings without his name attached. He told himself not to overthink it, that maybe he was being sensitive. Yet deep down, there was a growing unease. The more he ignored it, the more it repeated. Soon, Victor was being praised for strategies Daniel had contributed, and Daniel could feel the recognition slipping away. One afternoon, after a particularly successful client presentation, Daniel watched as Victor accepted congratulations for a concept Daniel had outlined word for word just days before. The moment was oddly disorienting. It was as if time folded back on itself, and he was standing in both the present and the past at once. He remembered the day he had taken credit for his friend's work, the ease with which he had justified it, the rush of stepping forward while someone else stayed silent. And now, he was the one standing silent while someone else took the applause. It wasn't just about the project. It was about seeing his own actions played back to him from the other side. This is where guilt transforms into regret. Guilt is tied to an event. It says, I did something wrong. Regret reaches deeper. It says, I became someone I never wanted to be. In that moment, Daniel realized that the discomfort he felt was not only about Victor's actions. It was about who he had been, and how easily he had once dismissed the pain of another person standing in his place. Regret has a way of piercing through the defenses we use to protect our self-image. It does not just haunt you with what happened. It confronts you with who you were when it happened. The Stoics understood this as one of life's most profound lessons. Seneca wrote that the greatest punishment for wrongdoing is to have become like the wrongdoer you despise. When Daniel saw himself in Victor, he could not separate his anger from his recognition. He was looking at a version of himself, stripped of all the justifications he had once leaned on, and this time, he could not tell himself it was harmless. He knew exactly what it felt like. As the weeks went by, the pattern with Victor became undeniable. Meetings were scheduled without him. Decisions were made in his absence. When the account finally wrapped, Victor received most of the credit. Daniel's frustration was real, but so was the awareness that he was being handed a lesson he had once forced on someone else. There was no satisfaction in the symmetry, only the weight of understanding. It is one thing to know you have done harm. It is another to feel it in your own skin. The mirror stage is one of life's most transformative forms of consequence. It does not arrive to destroy you. It arrives to show you the full measure of your actions in a way you cannot dismiss. For Daniel, it made him revisit every step of the choice he had made years before. The ambition that had seemed so important then felt small compared to the cost. The silence he had once mistaken for weakness now felt like an unanswerable judgment, and the respect he thought he had gained by winning was replaced by the awareness that he had lost something far more valuable. When life sends a person their reflection, it is not about revenge, it is about clarity. No argument, no lecture, no confrontation could have taught Daniel what Victor's actions taught him. In seeing himself in another's behavior, he could no longer hide from the truth. That truth stayed with him in quiet moments, shaping how he approached every relationship afterward. And that is how regret deepens. It takes root in the space between who you were and who you want to become, and it does not let you rest until you close the gap. Justice rarely arrives when we think it should. We imagine it as something swift, a clean answer to betrayal, a visible balancing of the scales. But life works on a different clock, one that pays no attention to our urgency. For Daniel, this truth became clear in the long stretch of time between what he had done and when the weight of it finally pressed down on him. In the months after taking credit for his friend's work, his career advanced, his reputation stayed intact, and his life looked like it was moving forward without consequence. If anyone had told him there would be a reckoning, he might have laughed. Yet the reckoning was already in motion, unfolding at a pace designed for maximum clarity, not speed. The Stoics understood that time is a necessary ingredient in truth, revealing itself. If consequences arrive too quickly, they can be dismissed as coincidence, blamed on bad luck, or projected onto someone else. When they arrive slowly, after the memory of the wrongdoing has faded from public view, there is nowhere for the mind to hide. By then, the wrongdoer has convinced themselves that what they did was justified or irrelevant. They have built comfort around the illusion that they were right. And that is precisely when the timing of life becomes sharpest. It strikes in the quiet space where there are no distractions and no excuses left to lean on. For Daniel, the delay allowed him to carry on without looking back for a long time. He built new connections, took on bigger projects, and told himself that the uneasy moments he felt were just part of normal stress. But the real turning point did not come until years later, long after the betrayal. One by one, the supports around him began to shift. A mentor retired, removing a source of quiet protection he hadn't realized he depended on. A trusted colleague left for another company, taking with them the steady flow of new opportunities. Slowly, the network that had buoyed him began to thin. None of it was dramatic enough to draw attention from others, but for Daniel, it was unmistakable. This is the divine delay at work. It waits until you are no longer expecting it. It waits until you have settled into a new normal, so that when the consequences arrive, they are unmistakably tied to you. It is not about cruelty. It is about precision. The longer the delay, the more undeniable the connection between action and outcome becomes. By the time it lands, you are standing alone with the truth, and the silence is louder than any accusation could be. the delay also serves another purpose. It protects the one who was wronged from becoming trapped in bitterness. If justice came immediately, the temptation to watch, to track every turn of the other person's misfortune, would be strong. That kind of fixation keeps you tied to them, emotionally entangled in a chapter you need to leave behind. The distance created by time allows you to grow past the need to see their downfall. It gives you the space to build something so strong that by the time the consequences arrive, you are no longer watching. You have moved beyond the role of witness and into the role of creator, shaping a life that has nothing to do with them. There was a moment when Daniel realized this himself. Years after the betrayal, when certain doors began closing and familiar faces drifted away, he thought about the friend he had wronged. He wondered if that friend ever noticed. The truth was, by then, that friend had built an entirely new life. The connections, the work, the peace they carried were all born from a path that no longer touched his. The idea that they might be somewhere far away, living well without any thought of him, was more humbling than any public judgment could have been. The divine delay is not a flaw in the system of justice. It is its most refined form. It allows life to work beneath the surface, reshaping circumstances until the lesson lands in a way that is undeniable. It gives you, the one who was hurt, the gift of separation, and it ensures that when the moment of reckoning comes, it comes with clarity so sharp it cannot be escaped. For the one on the receiving end, that clarity often arrives in private. There are no crowds to witness it, no headlines to mark the fall. It is a solitary moment of recognition, the understanding that every closed door, every faded connection, every piece of peace that slipped away is tied to the choice they made long ago. By the time Daniel stood at his office window one evening, watching the city lights flicker against the dark, he understood the timing. The delay had not been silence. It had been preparation. The consequences were not sudden. They had been building quietly, waiting for the moment when he would have no one left to blame, nowhere left to look but inward. And in that stillness, the truth finally stood before him with no disguise. There is a point in the quiet arc of recovery when something irreversible happens. You no longer feel the need to prove anything. You no longer carry the weight of what happened like an open wound. The story is still part of your history, but it no longer defines you. That is the moment you become untouchable. For Daniel, this transformation did not arrive with a single victory or a dramatic turning point. It came from a slow and deliberate rebuilding of his inner world, one choice at a time, until the person he was no longer resembled the person who had once been defined by ambition in the shadow of betrayal. The early stages of his change were invisible to most. He began making decisions with a clarity he had not known before, prioritizing integrity over quick gains. He sought out people who valued depth over image, who built slowly instead of grasping at shortcuts. These relationships grew into a new kind of network, one not dependent on charm or politics, but on trust that could withstand pressure. At work, he shifted his focus toward projects where collaboration was genuine, where credit was shared openly, where the purpose mattered more than the spotlight. This shift did not erase his past, but it rewrote the trajectory of his future. Becoming untouchable is not about becoming cold or distant. It is about reaching a place where your stability cannot be threatened by someone else's approval or rejection. Daniel learned that his real security was not in the corner office or the recognition from industry peers, but in the knowledge that he could stand on his own without compromising himself again. This kind of power is quiet, the kind that does not need to announce itself. It is felt in the way you walk into a room without needing to dominate it, in the way you can listen without feeling the urge to defend, in the way you can let others underestimate you because you no longer need their validation. For those who have caused harm, encountering someone who has reached this state is deeply unsettling. They are used to believing that their presence still has an effect, that they can reopen the past simply by showing up. But when the person they wronged has moved so far beyond their reach, the door is not just closed, it is gone entirely. The room has been rebuilt into something new, and they no longer have a place in it. When Daniel eventually crossed paths with the friend he had betrayed, it was in a crowded conference hall during an industry event. There was no hostility, no dramatic confrontation. There was only a polite exchange, a simple acknowledgement, and then the natural movement of two people whose lives no longer intersected. The friend's eyes carried no trace of bitterness, only the calm assurance of someone who had built a life untouched by his presence. In that moment, Daniel understood the full weight of what untouchable really meant. The Stoics would have called this self-mastery. It is the highest form of freedom, the ability to remain unmoved by the storms outside, because the inner foundation is solid. To reach it, you have to pass through the stages of loss, reflection, and the long work of rebuilding. It cannot be faked, and it cannot be rushed. It is earned through the discipline of choosing growth over retaliation, peace over noise, and integrity over quick relief. For Daniel, every choice to stay on this path strengthened the walls around his peace until they could not be breached by old memories or familiar faces. The irony of becoming untouchable is that it is often the most humbling consequence for the one who caused harm. Seeing someone you once underestimated or discarded standing in their own power without a trace of dependence on you strips away the illusions of control. It forces you to see the limits of your influence and the permanence of certain losses. For Daniel, it was not the absence of contact that stung the most, but the realization that even if the opportunity to make amends appeared, it would not change the fact that he no longer belonged in that chapter of the other person's life. That space had been claimed by growth, by people who had earned their place, by a peace that did not require his presence. To become untouchable is to rise above the old cycle entirely. It is to know that your life is no longer a reaction to what was done to you, but a creation shaped by your own values. It is the quiet confidence that you will never again be who you were in your weakest moment. This is not armor built out of bitterness, but strength forged from understanding. You do not need to guard yourself with suspicion because you have built your boundaries so clearly that nothing misaligned can slip through unnoticed. You no longer chase closure because you have already closed the door yourself. You no longer look back because what is ahead of you is too important to risk losing by turning around. For Daniel, this untouchable state was the final chapter in a long, unseen transformation. He had moved from the restless unease of guilt to the hard mirror of regret, through the loss of opportunities, and into the slow acceptance of life's delayed justice. In becoming untouchable, he reclaimed the one thing that could never be given to him by others, the certainty that his worth was no longer negotiable. And in that certainty, he finally understood that true power is not in what you can take from others, but in what you can build within yourself so deeply that nothing and no one can take it away. Daniel's story began with a choice he thought he could justify. In the gray drizzle of Seattle, ambition seemed like a virtue worth protecting at any cost. He took credit for his closest friend's work, convinced that the opportunity it brought would shape his future for the better. On the surface, it worked. His career moved forward, his reputation stayed intact, and his life appeared untouched by the betrayal. But the truth was already moving beneath the surface, and life had begun to weave consequences into his path, long before he could recognize them. At first, the shifts were almost invisible. The loss of peace crept in quietly, settling into the stillness of the night when there were no distractions left to drown it out. Sleep became shallow, interrupted by thoughts he never invited but could not silence. Simple moments turned into reminders. A coffee shop, a familiar song, a passing memory, all carrying the weight of what he had done. That was the first fracture, the quiet collapse of the mind that can't make peace with itself. As time went on, the external world began to reflect what was happening internally. Opportunities that once flowed without effort began to dry up. the energy in relationships changed, shifting from warmth to polite distance. Conversations that once carried trust now felt guarded. Daniel's network thinned, not because of open conflict, but because people instinctively moved away from someone whose integrity had been compromised. No one had to confront him for the truth to work its way into his circumstances. The doors simply stopped opening. Then came the mirror. In Victor, a new colleague, Daniel saw the reflection of his own past actions. The excitement of partnership turned to the sting of being overlooked, as ideas he had contributed were presented without his name attached. Standing in that moment, he remembered the rush of taking credit years before, and for the first time, he understood what it felt like from the other side. Guilt deepened into regret, not only for the action but for becoming the kind of person capable of it. That regret was a heavier weight than any loss of opportunity could ever be. Life didn't rush to punish him. It waited. The divine delay gave him years to carry the illusion that he had moved beyond the past. By the time the consequences became undeniable, the thinning of his network, the closing of doors, the fading of connections, there was no one left to blame. The timing stripped away excuses and left him face to face with himself. It was in that space that the possibility of change began. The final transformation was not loud or dramatic. It came slowly, through consistent choices that rebuilt his life on a different foundation. He sought honesty in relationships, collaboration in work, and depth in the people he surrounded himself with. Eventually, he became untouchable, not because he was shielded by power or status, but because his worth no longer depended on anyone else's approval. The friend he had betrayed no longer carried bitterness, and their polite, distant exchange at a conference was proof that life had moved them into separate worlds. That moment made him understand the true cost of his actions and the freedom that comes from growth. The lesson in Daniel's story is not about revenge. It is about the natural correction that life brings when we act out of alignment with integrity. The first consequence is always internal, the quiet loss of peace, followed by the gradual shifting of external circumstances. Sometimes it includes the sharp clarity of meeting our own reflection, and it almost always arrives on a timeline we cannot control. But the most powerful outcome is not in watching someone else fall. It is in becoming the kind of person who no longer needs to. For anyone listening, the takeaway is clear. Your actions plant seeds, and those seeds will grow into something you will have to live with. If you act with integrity, those seeds will strengthen you. If you act without it, they will one day surround you with the echoes of your own choices. In a world that rewards speed and appearances, it is easy to think that what you do in the moment can be hidden or forgotten. But peace of mind, trust, and respect are built slowly, and they can be lost in an instant. Once they are gone, they are not easily regained. Applying this lesson to your life means choosing the long road of integrity over the quick gain of dishonor. It means protecting your peace by walking away from situations that tempt you to compromise your values. It means understanding that silence can be a more powerful response than retaliation, not because it hides weakness, but because it allows life to deliver the lessons that words never could. And most of all, it means focusing on your own growth, so deeply that by the time justice arrives, you no longer need to see it to believe it. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe that the most powerful justice is the one that happens quietly, over time, without the need for you to be involved? Or do you think it's better to take action and seek closure directly? Share your perspective in the comments, so we can learn from each other's experiences. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. Your support gives me the motivation to keep creating powerful, meaningful content that helps you protect your peace, master your emotional intelligence, and rise with quiet strength. The next story might be the one that changes the way you see everything.